Alright, I'm Rolf Raven, also known as Coach Nefarious, and I'll be reviewing your game. So first, a little thing about me. I'm currently just fell out of Diamond recently, and I've been coaching some high Diamond teams, low Diamond teams, some much lower teams, just trying to get a feel for coaching in general, not just trying to coach better and better players, right? Just been doing that for, I don't know, a little more than a year, maybe 1.5 years. So that's enough about me. I see that you guys have a pretty nice lineup, and you guys are up against 5 people who I personally haven't looked up, but I presume that they're around the same elo bracket. That is just something I'll assume for now. And with that being said, let's jump right into the review, right? Well, the introduction's out of the way, right? Anyway, I'll be doing this in English because I like to have future reference and stuff all in the same language. Obviously, most of my coaching is in English, even though I'm Dutch. I know you guys are Dutch. If you ever get a new teammate on board, if you have an English coach, all that type of stuff, and you can just refer to materials in the past, like text notes, reviews on tape, right? Like everything, you can just say, oh yeah, it's right over there, right? And it's all understandable for everyone. So that's my reasoning for doing this in English. Right, all that out of the way, let's do the review. First, notes on team composition, right? Team composition, drafting, that kind of stuff. You guys have a NAR, and what I always like to say, I like to use analogies, I'm a little bit corny in that way. If you're doing a bank robbery and one of you guys can't show up, and it turns out he actually did another bank robbery somewhere else on the map, right? And that guy's doing a bank robbery, and, he busts or he succeeds, but it puts everyone on high alert. Then, obviously, once you guys come in, you better be able to disengage, right? You better be able to pull out and use aim bolt back to your base, right? So, in this case, that means that it's good that you have a Braum. Very, very nice. Zoe is kind of, 5 out of 10 in that regard. It's like, not the best. And Nocturne doesn't really fit in with that. So, in this case, Gnar is kind of like a counter pick to Urgot, and in my opinion, that doesn't really work that well. It's like, if you let a Gnar split push, or team fight, well, team fighting right now is just not that strong. So most people in Korean competitive, if you follow the scene, you know that most of them split push. And what happens is you're trying to run this kind of disengaged composition with that automatically, right? Because team fight is just not as strong as an Urgot. Even if you counter him in lane, it's still quite easy to deny you through ganks. So it's a very fragile pick unless you're playing it against a tank, top, and jungle. And playing it with a disengaged composition, or at least one of the two, right? Like, it should always be a tank top lane. If it's not a tank jungler, then at least you should have this disengaged composition for splitting. If you die in top lane, you can get value. That's the idea. If you just can't die if you're immortal, well, then who cares if you don't have disengaged comp. Alright. So, those are my notes and takes on team comp. Gnar, not the best into this composition. Also, since Nocturne is usually a bit of follow-up, and Braum doesn't actually have the most reliable follow-up. You'll see in this game, Braum usually has a flash. That means that you kind of want a mid laner, for example, with reliable CC. So, a Ryze, or a Lissandra, or what's some other ones? Malzahar, or, those kind of picks. Nocturne also doesn't rely on priorities that much, so it's fine if you had to pick Malzahar or something, and you just don't get the priority eventually, right? Like, you can get it early on, but not consistently. Then that's fine. Also, if you took, I don't know, Ryze, for example. Ryze tends to run out of mana against some of the other mid laners, right? So that wouldn't be too big of an issue. Anyway, so those are my 2 main takes on composition here, and what I think maybe could be better. Other than that, you guys have a really solid team with a really solid game plan. And simply put, you can always... Planning is always one of these things where you don't need to always do more and a lot of it. You just need to have something that works, And in this case, you guys are like, okay, let's let Nocturne power farm till 6 and just clubber stomp bot lane, with a 3 or 4 man. And that works. That works fine. If you're in an elo bracket where people start deep warding, they slow push. Instead of Brand, I saw him trying to poke, and he didn't poke, but he also didn't leave for deep ward. So they had no vision on Grump or whatever, and didn't see them walk up like this. So they just got ulted, and they had no idea. If you reach a point where the all-in isn't a workable idea for the entire early game, then you'll have to do more planning. What if that fails? What do we do then? Right? But in this case, right where you're at, I think this is very good. Keep it simple and keep it effective. And you did that. That's great. That's what I want to see, personally, when I'm coaching a team in this elo bracket. Alright. So, that's the jungle priorities and planning, you know. One more thing about routing, right? Now we're on the topic of jungling. There's a few concepts to keep in mind when you're power farming. First of all, if there's a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, in League of Legends, you have the luxury of making that pot of gold the start of your rainbow. You see what I mean? It's like, if there's Krugs, for example, they give the most experience in gold. Why not take that at the start of your route, right? Just go top lane, clear your red buff, and go Krugs, right? That works, right? So, if you'll notice, if you watch pro players routing on different champions, you'll notice that almost all of them that are high economy start at red buff and go Krugs for that reason. And what they'll do in combination, one more important aspect of this strategy, this is just how the strategies work. It's something your coach could, for example, tell you, how does this work? Well, you go to Krugs with the specific intent of waiting for the enemy jungler to either show up on the pixel brush wards, or if they don't show up, you kind of know where they are, right? Like, you kind of have an idea that, for example, they went to Krugs as well. That means they're on the opposite side of the map, so you know that the scuttle is free. You know you can establish a deep ward here, and then based on whether this guy is vertically jungling or not, you can decide to try and kill him if you think he's low. Try to take the buff if you think he's just very far away. Just piss off and not do anything if you think he's not low and he's, you know, gonna be there in time. So you have a lot of options in that case because of your vision setup. This is the classic, this is what SkillCap did a video on this. They called it the Western route. So, Western route, very recommended on high economy junglers like Nocturne. That's one point about routing. Alright, second point about routing. The worst thing that can happen when you're power farming is having Swiss cheese, right? Cheese with holes in it, right? Why I'm saying that is if you're like a low economy jungler, you're constantly ganking and you have a hole in your jungle somewhere. I mean, who cares, right? You're just ganking. You take camp somewhere and you gank again, or you go base. Like, how coherent that route is, not the biggest thing. It's not going to differentiate between the challengers and the masters, right? That's not the biggest deal in that case. If you're playing Nocturne and your plan is to power farm and full clear, go base, full clear again, then the efficiency and how linear your route is and how many holes you create in your route, that's the ultimate thing that you should worry about. So, and obviously I've already seen the game, so I can comment on this with foresight. You should always aim to clear contingent areas, right? Because if you don't, you end up with holes. Because you might say, wait a second, if you just clear Gromp, right? And now you have wolves. You have wolves in the top side. Now, if you were to leave wolves up, that can be fine, because you clear top side, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, you can maybe clear wolves, Gromp, and go into bot side, and you've cleared a contingent area again. That is quite risky, though. Because if you ever need to take those wolves, you end up with a hole, right? Because once those wolves are down, Grump's gonna respawn, and you have a hole in your jungle, right? Downtime. That's really bad. So, you want to clear contingent areas. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, just some basic geometry facts. You want to clear in as linear a fashion as possible while clearing contingent areas, right? Because obviously, Straight line is shortest distance between 2 points. Is you know how it works. You know how lines work. So, no Swiss cheese and linear routing. Now, this might sound trivial, right? Like, you guys know this, right? But the reason I'm saying this is because I saw the routing, and one of the biggest things that I saw was, I guess that's the third point to mention. This is, you went in a straight line, but not in a good way. It's like, if you're at the other side of your entire route, you're literally at Krugs and the start of your route is Grump, it's furthest away, then going base and going to Grump literally takes the same amount of time as walking to Grump. And what you did, Nocturne, I don't know your name, I'm gonna call you guys by the game names, right? So, Trix Fate. If you find yourself at Krugs, just think, if you're going to Grump, and then you go base, and then you go to Wolves, right? Just calculate how much distance you took all this way here, right? And then you had to go base for 7 seconds, and then you had to go all the way back. If you just based and walked in a straight line, you would be covering way less distance, right? And you'd be clearing in a linear fashion again. So that is something that's just like a decision, right? Like, as soon as you see that, like, oh, right, like, there's just never a scenario in which you need to do that. I can't really think of any exceptions. I mean, yeah. Maybe there will be exceptions someday, and I'll have to come back on my words, but this is definitely something that would be extremely uncommon at best. Okay. So, that's team composition, jungle priorities, routing. What else have we got? Alright, so I have some other points. Right, vision. I already talked about the setup that is used with the Western route. You need to know the setup of vision with the kind of general game plan that you have in combination with what they're actually playing and how dangerous that is, right? So, for example, if you're up against a Hecarim, you know roughly how you should ward because you know that he's probably gonna go for a Predator route. So if you, for example, ward Krugs and he's not on Krugs, you know that he's doing a full clear towards his top side instead, right? So you have very, very good indication of what he's going to do then. If instead you're up against Kha'Zix, usually Kha'Zix players, I actually had a coach disagree with me on this. I tried to discuss with coaches about routing and all that kind of stuff. He actually said, no, Kha'Zix players don't do Krugs. I watch Fans and they actually do. So my mind is going to do that, but that doesn't matter. The point is that you should have wards and at least establish when they enter a river, right? So the Pixel Brush wards are pretty unconditional. It's not just part of the Western route. Starting bot side, it's still ward especially the opposite side scuttle. Because the opposite side scuttle, it will tell you when the opponent's warding you, for one thing. And secondly, if you can't meet the enemy jungler, or you can, right, if there's some reason that you want to know if he's here, right, like you're naturally getting closer to here. Obviously, if he's very far away from where you want to be, you can't really react to it, right? So if he's over here, you can decide, like, oh, I'll have to do a bouncing route, and I'll have to go back into this. Or, you know, like, oh, I can kill him right now. Or, you know, you have those options available if you ward the side opposite to you instead of the same side. If you ward in Uganda and you're over here in the Netherlands, how are you going to get to Uganda, right? If you can see something's happening there. Alright. Enough with the corny analogies. That's routing, that's vision. I had I gotta be honest with you. I have a shit ton of corny analogies, and I just use some of them. Some of them I prepare, some of them I don't. It's like walking in a dark forest with man-eating monkeys. I think that's a little over the top, right? I think you guys get the point about vision without talking about man-eating monkeys. I just, you know, let's try and not turn this into a stand-up comedy act. That's not gonna work out for me. Alrighty. So, in terms of lanes, which lanes will I be talking about? I think some coaches say, oh, I don't want to talk about lanes, I don't want to talk blah, blah, blah. I think that's also a matter of how many resources you have and how good your players are. And there's a lot of things that factor into it. The base question is this. Would you benefit from me talking about lanes? More than if I talk about win conditions, right? oh, win conditions, right? Oh, what kind of composition do you need? In my opinion, laning is going to be 90% of the game outcome, and I think it's very, very important that you understand how it's played, the concepts, and the exact execution is up to you, but I try to explain some core concepts, right? Rather than just comment on every single event. Oh, you died here, you shouldn't have died here, you should have flashed, right? That's not always the best way to do it. So, I'm gonna talk mostly about laning coordination, and I'm gonna talk about some concepts like the functions behind your abilities, because, for example, mechanical difficulty, right? Sometimes can depend on how many functions one ability has. For example, Lee Sin Q can be used for gap closing, can be used for execution damage, can be used for escaping. What else can it be used for? Can be used for scouting, right? So you have one ability that is one action in the game the same way, but the function it has, the reason you're doing it, the reason it has value, is different every time, right? Or not every time. There's 4 different reasons, right, that I can think of right now. So, that's why these champions are mechanically complicated. The buttons aren't very hard to press, right? It's figuring out the right way of using an ability out of the 4 options you have all the time. That's what's difficult, right? With Brown Q, you have, for example, 2 reasons that you could use it. The first is to prevent people from chasing you, for disengage. Disruption is what they call that, or disengage. Like, those are kind of synonymous. Sometimes you can kind of engage and disrupt. So, I guess they're slightly different. Disrupt kind of means you're holding people off, but sometimes you can use that to pick someone out, to pick someone off, right? But they're very similar, so we're just going to treat it like they're kind of the same. And the other usage is to actually get the stomp proc on people, right? To actually kill people, go in, slow them down while they're running away, and to get the proc. So those are 2 in the same thing, right? So I guess it's 3 usages if you want to be really precise about it. And how does that become relevant? Well, it becomes relevant very, very quickly. All right. With that in mind, that framework in mind, I'll stop with that for a second, and I'll tell you when it becomes relevant. Bigger topic, laning coordination. That is something very, very coachable, or not, at least slightly coachable. That's something that's part of like how people do tryouts as well, right? Like how much coordination is there between the 2 bot laners? Very big topic, right? That was a little bit lacking here. They actually, I don't know if these people, how long these enemies have been playing together, but they were absolutely discoordinated. You guys had more coordination for sure than the enemy players. And still, here I am saying, well, it wasn't very good, it should be better, right? But let me just tell you right now, it was certainly magnitude better than your opponents. But it didn't get capitalized on very heavily. Again, I will bolster that with examples later on. Alright. So, also, sometimes I like to use analogies for the different functions of abilities as well. Imagine you have a bear trap, right? Sometimes, if you nobody's like coming at you, or you're all safe in the forest, you want to just toss a bear trap and hope it hits something, right? You just toss it 50 yards away. That's a pretty long toss, by the way. It's a fucking Olympic style toss, but alright. And you hear a squeal somewhere and you go in, right? That's cool. That's one usage of your ability, right? Just kind of poke, but then with follow-up, hopefully, because otherwise it's really not worth the mana in the first place, unless you're full mana. It's getting a little bit hairy, right? Anyway, most of the time, if you miss your Q, that gives them an opportunity to poke you out, right? So, in that case, that's actually horrible, right? Imagine you have one way of defending yourself. You have a bear claw to literally clasp down anyone who comes at you, and you toss it 50 yards away. And now you no longer have a bear claw, right? That's kind of sometimes what I say, and I mean, the point is fairly simple, right? Your abilities should not go on cooldown for unnecessary secondary usages, like trying to poke, or trying to maybe get like a few procs off, If you can't get stun on it, you can't get stun on it. It's not worth using it for poke instead, if they have an all-in threat. So, we're gonna actually look at examples. So, example Exhibit A. Exhibit A. Dio Brando. There's one last thing that I need to talk about is the distance from the target they're trying to poke or all in, right? What's supposed to happen is if you draw a circle between the aggressor, Brand here, and the target, that would be Lucian, right? Then if you draw a circle between that, you should find that Jin is roughly on that circle. And that if Brand is closing in, that Jin is also closing in, right? To keep that distance the same. That is what coordination means. Keeping those distances the same, going in at the same time. That's the consequence, right? If Jin needs to be closer in auto range or whatever, then he needs to be slightly closer than Brand, blah, blah, blah. The idea is pretty clear. They need to be entering here at the same time. Now, look at this. This is a good example where Jin is actively looking away. He's not kiting behind his own minions away from possible Brand Q, right? But Brand is walking back. Now he's like completely changing his laning mechanics, right? He's suddenly looking for autos. And there's no retaliation on that. But look where Brand is. Brand is super far away, right? So that's Exhibit A. Like, Jen randomly switches sort of what he's doing. He goes in for an auto, animation locks himself. But Brand's not in position, so you guys can two-man that for a second and use the Q, and especially if that hits, you might actually get stun proc. You're already on the way to winning this lane. Right. So, now, Exhibit B. Brand going in on his own. Did you see that? Alright. I keep skipping past it because, you know, there's a small timing window to hit. Alrighty. It's coming up, it's coming up. Yeah. He's outside the rush here. This is the scenario I'm talking about. So there's two parts about coordination. The first one is to identify whether they are coordinated, and if not, you abuse it by punishing the guy that's going in on the zone 2v1. The second part, if you can't do that, I mean, then there's just no reason to hit these minions, because all you're doing if you auto this minion is make it die faster, which means that they slow push slower, which means they deny you more minions. So you gotta make up your mind beforehand whether you can 2 versus 1. If you can't 2v1, no purpose to stay in this lane, like actively autoing minions. Okay, so you see this scenario. Brown should be in the middle of the lane, right? Sort of mirroring Brand's movements, right? If Brand goes and tries and looks for something, he can be there to peel, right? If Brand Qs Brown, then Lucian can farm the lane, right? If there's no minions that are low, you can both back off for a while, right? And re-enter once a minion gets low, with Brown leading that charge. If they two-man that, if they two-man actively walk up, then that can be very hard. That's where CS are missed. That is where, you know, you need to tank abilities. But again, you let them force errors, right? You force them to play correctly. That's the key here. So if you stand and mirror Brand's movements, you force them to go in at the same time, and if they don't know how to do that, they will lose this lane. They will get poked out whenever they try to poke, because it's 2v1. Here again, if the plan is to hit this CS, then Brown needs to tank this ability potentially, right? And make sure that Lucian can actually walk up in CS, right? And this is something that's very hard to implement, because it's all in real time. It's not in real time for me. I can pause and think about it, right? These are things that I need to learn for all 5 lanes, and I don't need to apply it for all 5 lanes, right? So I do respect that this is difficult, just to clarify that, right? Sometimes it can be very patronizing when you're criticizing people for 10 minutes. It's like, wait, what rank are you again? Oh, right. You're a low diamond. Oh, wow, I've never seen a low diamond player before, right? I do this shit wrong all the time. Alright. Let's go on to the next topic. So, Right, that's sometimes how when I'm looking at my notes, you'll generally hear me say duh, because I'm just struggling to figure out which one I should do next. They're not ordered. I think we got most of our notes burned up. I think what remains now are the examples of what I talked about previously. You see this? You see this route from Nocturne? It's gonna take like 2 minutes 45. These Krugs are gonna respawn before you even finish your route. Even though if you just clear in a linear line, you have like 45 seconds to spare, right? Like even with the 2:30 respawn timers, it didn't. You could just clear the entire thing and you had time to spare. So you can see, boom, 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 and it's gonna respawn now. See that? That took you 2:45. That's insane. Insane. 2:45 to clear Krugs, Gromp, Wolves, Raptors. That should never, ever, 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 ever take that long. If you went base, Gromp, Wolves, Raptors, you would have that minute to spare. You know what you can do in that minute? You can deep ward. That's what junglers do with their spare time if they're not good at ganking. They deep ward. There's a certain order of things, right? If you can't gank, you counter gank. If you can't counter gank, you deep ward. And if you can counter gank, you still deep ward. And if you can gank, you still deep ward. So it's unconditional. It's just it's the only thing you can do in this case. If you can't also counter gank and gank, everyone who can gank can also counter gank and deep ward. It's just everyone who can counter gank can also deep ward. You can only deep ward. Well, then you just do full clears for the rest of that time. That's sort of the natural order of jungle right now. So you guys, all right. Let me just give credit where credit is due. All right. All right. That may sound a little bit sarcastic, but it's actually really nice to see a game plan being executed very, very clearly. Right. No complications. No weird stuff. Weird deviations, making it harder than it's supposed to be. You guys did it. You got it. Got Drake. Also, resource allocation. Little side topic here. Resource allocation. How do you do Dragon? How many people do you need? If there's no opposition to Dragon, then you don't need everyone on the Dragon. You can let, for example, Lucian solo lane in bot lane and catch some experience, right? Excuse me. Alright, so what that means is that Lucian gets a solo experience and gets a shove into this. Because what happened here is very, very, very atrocious. Lucian, if Lucian has ult, he has ult, you need to clear this wave. Like, you don't have mana, a whole lot of mana anymore, so you can only use your ult, sadly. And maybe, like, at some point, maybe you can use one ability other than that. But you need to ult this wave. And the reason you need to ult this wave is because they can freeze it otherwise. So you're going to miss a full cannon wave, which is huge, right? That's going to snowball tremendously. So, yeah, this is an absolute must. Because if they freeze this, you're going to miss another wave after this, right? That's horrible. And because they're a poke lane and you just ran out of resources and Braum's still level 5, you guys are just getting massively screwed over. They don't actually freeze. They don't seem to understand wave management. Freezing is one of these buzzwords where everybody in Silver knows what freezing is. But nobody in Silver can pull off a freeze. I always ask people, oh, what's freezing? They are almost insulted that you talk about those topics. Because they're like, I know this shit, dude. I've been playing since Season 1. It's like, yeah, but you're Silver. Who cares how long you've been playing? What matters is how good you are, and you're not very good. They never appreciate when you say shit like that. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that people don't? Yeah. Alright. The point is, this would be an example where you need to understand freezing at a level where you prevent it. The reason it doesn't show here, you guys don't feel the immediate feedback of, oh shit, we just got denied X many waves, is because they don't freeze. They make unforced errors. Right? But point is still very, very clear. Once you start scrimming against higher elo players, if you did this against my highest rated team, you would automatically now be losing bot lane. and you wouldn't see a single CS anymore until Nocturne gets ult, which is not that far away anymore. Not gonna lie, I thought that would take longer, but point in case, right? Point in case they are not as vulnerable when they're over here. It's really hard for you guys to clear that. You need to spend an ultimate. You might as well do it before you base. Spend an ultimate then. But alas, they do none of that and just hard shove. Also, this is a little laning pattern thing. This is going to be the most micro-specific thing I talk about. This is an example where they could be deep warding, right? I don't know if they have any wards, but if they have no wards, then I would ask why don't they have but they do have wards. They have Warring Totem and a Vision Ward. You can cheese with wards by putting in cheesy pink wards at places where your enemy doesn't usually scout it. And you can just put, for example, a regular ward right over here. To cross over from Wolves to Grump, Grump to Wolves, entering blue buff to every single one of these interactions. All of these routes are covered, right? So that's a very, very common way for Nocturne to enter bot lane. And if they're in Fog of War and you don't know where they are, you don't know where the deep ward is. So it's very hard to dodge this ward. Unless people start warding too consistently in the same way. Then you can start dodging it because you know how people... That's another layer, right? League is played in layers. You can see sometimes where you watch a Korean game and they have this one concept down, they deep ward, and then this guy has one other concept down, like, oh, they're walking up the lane, but then these guys notice that the players are playing up, blah, 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 and it just keeps going, right? It's like a mind game of sorts. But it's hidden in plain sight. You know, you can't see it even though it's visible. So, if you look at this here. Did you see that? I don't know if you caught that because it was so short. I'll show it one more time in slow motion. See this? This is it. Right? It's just like a fundamental thing. There's this thing called pockets, right? There's always destination areas where you want to be. Positional areas that you want to visualize. And if you're not really paying conscious attention to your laning, you definitely want to do that. Because even if you're not losing against other players, if you were to pay attention to it a lot, then over time you will start winning. And you'll start climbing until it becomes difficult again, right? It's one of these things where some people think they don't need a whole lot of work because they're not worse than other players. But the thing is that challenger players are a lot better at it than other players. And takes precedence because it happens earlier and has more impact. So this is it. This is where Brand could just use Conflagrate and then stun. And you'd lose more than half your health bar. Simply because you went and stepped up here for no reason, right? You're giving them like 60 gold, you're giving them half a health bar, and you kind of lose the lane off of that. So it's an extremely big mistake. It doesn't get registered as such because you're on full health and they miss some abilities, but you really need to realize how big of a blunder it is just to randomly walk all the way up to here out of the turret when Lucian has no intention of fighting this, and of course he doesn't. Alright. So, that's a little thing about pockets, you know, one more lane mechanic, like destination areas where you want to be, right? I could have mentioned that earlier as well when you were standing behind Lucian instead of mirroring Brand's movements. But in that case, it wasn't really about pockets, it was more about responding to enemies, so. Two concepts, talked about both. Alright, that's a lot of laning mechanics. Gonna warm up here. Alright, communication, alright? Communication. I have some things to say about that. So, blue buck because this is gonna be a roast. Alright. So imagine that you're walking across the battlefield, right? And there's nades dropping left and right, it's people getting shot, and you take out a notebook. And what do you start doing? You start doing a performance evaluation of one of your soldiers. Anyone got a pen? Come on, anyone? No? George, you got a pen? You know, and then meanwhile you're like running across the battlefield like people, there's shit happening, right? And you're just like, alright, I just want to talk about this. Last game, I remember very vividly, an error has been made, and you didn't pay attention to that this game. I'm very disappointed in that regard. I think you really should be looking not to walk into unwarded brushes again, right? So, let me just go back to that scenario and mainly talk about two things. One is anticipation and communication beforehand, and the second is communication afterwards, right? And this is something, I never babysit people on communication, but when things get out of hand, I start getting more serious, you know what I mean? This is like right at the edge where if this communication, the way you're talking, if that were to last for 2 months, eventually someone just fucking snaps and just loses their mind and is like, fuck you guys, I don't want to play anymore. That's eventually, you know, there's a limit to everyone's patience, right? And if there is a certain amount of positivity coming in and negativity coming out, or however you want to call it, right, there has to be a certain balance, right? Where there's enough time between reprimands and whatever, right? What I'm doing, for example, I try to make some lighthearted analogies, or maybe try to find some, not really jokes, not turn it into a comedy, but lighten it up a little bit, lighten the tone up by talking in a particular way, right? And that's something a lot of people who coach try to do, to soften the blow without criticizing less, right? Without reducing the negativity in a way, right? So, if that's not happening, right, there needs to be some limit on how much negative shit is being spewed out. And in this case, I will give you a very specific example of the difference between being negative and being rude versus being to the point and constructively criticizing someone for mistakes, right? So here you see, do you see it here? Do you see the difference between the intents of the players? Now I want to talk about communication is very complicated. You have all sorts of things, right? You can, on the one hand, you need to be able to criticize, but on the other hand, too much means people get frustrated. So there's a balance there. That's what I talked about, right? And on the other hand, there's also this thing called anticipation and shared responsibility, right? And I have an analogy to explain that. Imagine if you're in the passenger seat of a car driving 200 miles an hour, right? And you're about to hit like a U-turn or something. And you see the U-turn coming and you're driving 200 miles an hour. What is your reaction if you're a passenger in that car? You have no responsibility, right? It's the driver's responsibility to drive safely, to get you to the destination safely, right? Everybody knows that. And yet, what will people do when they drive in that car? Or when they are passengers in that car? You'll start shouting like, slow the fuck down, what are you doing, right? You're gonna be very abrupt, very loud, you're probably gonna repeat yourself a couple of times. You're gonna do everything that is just, like, intuitive to you in terms of how you should communicate with people in dire situations, right? You don't have a lot of time. You're not gonna say, I don't think you should do that. You're gonna be very loud, very clear. Everything that you want it to be when a situation like that occurs, naturally, right? That's our survival instincts kicking in right there. Now, if I see someone running into a brush straight in, like, and you know the Brand's in there, like, why would Brand have backed? You know he's in that brush, right? Like, I would be shouting, like, oh, go back, what are you doing? Go back, right? And maybe someone will respond in time, maybe they won't. That's you doing your part of the share, even though you don't need to, even though it's not a requirement. You're doing your part of the share because you're a teammate and you're all involved in this together, right? So that's the communication beforehand and why and the how and blah, 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 right? Also, a little thing about mechanics here. Juking has a particular function, right? That's something you do if you don't have flash. You had flash here, so once this guy was committed and would certainly die to the turret, you could just flash out. If you're afraid of him hitting you something, which I don't think he had anything remaining, the cooldowns are bugged because I paused, you could at least flash out. Juking is never an option. You either walk straight back, which would have been sufficient in my mind, or if you're not sure about that, you flash. Juking is only if you don't have other options, or if you're full HP and you want to play high variance because you can tank a hit. Those are the only two scenarios for juking. Okie dokie. So, with that out of the way, communication afterwards, right? Afterwards. You can criticize someone. You can do two things. You can either make a plan towards the rest of this game, and that is not recommended that you do that. I would really minimize that unless it's something really important. Like, let's say Baron setups, and you get caught, and you're like, oh shit, we need to approach Barons this way. Right, you start making a call on how to do this from now on, right? That's fine. The other thing you can do is you can share your frustration in limited portions, right? But it should only be frustration. You should be like, fuck this, you know? Like, oh my god, fuck that, right? You shouldn't name call. You should, you know, it should just be like, god damn it, you know? And then someone's like, alright, sorry. It's like, alright. That's it, right? You're still frustrated, but you can't keep going, right? Now what you can do, the worst thing, even if you call someone an idiot, like, I'm not gonna bench someone because they called someone an idiot. Like, I'm not your nan, right? But what I will do is try and put a ban on argumentative criticism. And that is criticism that falls right in the middle between clear, concise, we need to do this in the future, and on the other hand, just venting some frustration, saying, oh god damn it, fuck this. And what that means is if you start saying, dude, why do you do that? Why do you keep doing that, right? That's a very argumentative, loaded question, right? That's just rhetoric. You're just sharing your frustrations in a loaded way that's frustrating for someone else to have to listen to. Instead of saying, fuck this, or fuck you even, right? You're making this sort of argument. And like, oh, why did you do that? And you say, oh, in last game this happened, and I told you shouldn't do this, and you do it anyway, and you're just trying to provoke someone into creating... that's something a coach can do in a session when someone's being delusional. You're trying to provoke some sort of response. That is not what you're trying to do in a scrim, right? That's the worst thing that would happen, is that people start arguing. Because a lot of times, Dreadpool was very apologetic and stuff, right? But if you have someone that's a little more argumentative and easier to provoke, then this can lead to a lost scrim, simply because two people start shouting at each other and they don't focus on the game anymore and they're tilted, and afterwards, you know, who knows, they don't want to play, blah, blah, blah. You get all these team issues, right? A lot of teams disband over stuff like that, like communication-related stuff. So that's why I'm like, I'm not your nan. It's not like I'm going to say, oh, you can never call someone an idiot, but there's things worse than just calling someone an idiot. And creating argumentative criticisms like this, like what you said, what I remember, Vic said something along the lines of, oh, you did that last game as well. That's very, very harshly not recommended to do that. So, alright, that's a heavy roast. Alright, I'm not saying that this is weird behavior. This happens in a lot of teams, right? I'm not saying, oh my god, how could you do this? It's horrible. It's a very natural response when someone walks into a rush and dies. If Brand hit his stun, like, the only reason he survives is because he missed his abilities, right? But some things have to stop in a scrim environment, in a team environment, just because you need to make things work, right? Just like socially, like you learn to not talk about certain things because it just leads to argument and debate, which you don't have time for, and people just naturally pick up that some political topics, maybe you're not walking up to your teacher and talking about it with them, right? there's just, you know, and the same thing applies in scrims. You can't open up a debate during a scrim. Alright. Anyway. Let's see. Next thing I want to talk about. It's gonna head up in a while. Look at this. Always funny. Always funny if you're just watching people do their little thing. We're gonna skip ahead a little bit. Gonna skip ahead right about here. If you're playing against an assassin and the assassin has reached a crucial level, then you want to take your bomb plants. Oh, the bomb plant has been taken. My bad. That is entirely my bad. I swear that it was a blue buff where the bomb plant was available, but maybe I'm wrong on that. It's a nice reminder, in case you guys forgot about that. Well, then now you know, but apparently you guys know already. There's this aspect of gameplay that I refer to as sharpness, right? And sharpness is what I refer to as being in a state where you're very close to your natural reaction time in reacting to things. So, let's say you do a benchmark and you react to a circle turning another color, and you get, I don't know, 220 milliseconds. That's like close to the average. Very hard to condition yourself to do it faster. It is possible, but whatever, right? 220. Now, most of the things you're gonna react to in life, right, to a red light or something turning green, you're gonna be slower than that, significantly slower. 300 milliseconds would still be very, very fast, right? Half a second is very usual. 3/4 of a second for a video game is pretty damn slow. In real life, it is still pretty common. Okay, so, and when you're scrimming, right, I expect you to warm up. Like, I haven't instructed my players to do this yet. I'm still starting out as a team coach in a way, even though I've been doing it for a long time. But I personally, whenever I scrim or do something serious in the game itself, I will always do warm-ups with my mouse, right, to make, and spam in the game. You will notice pros oftentimes don't use auto-pathing. They'll just, you know, click along the surface. I'm not saying that's a requirement, but the reason this is something people do is because it keeps you sharp. You need to be in a state of, well, I'm playing PvE, but I'm also playing a scrim, and people can kill me, and people are chasing after me. So when this happens, right, like, you need to spell shield a Q. It's just a quick response. Oh, there's a jump coming. Jump, Q, boom, right? Oh, shit, flash, boom, escape, right? There's just a certain speed behind your actions that needs to happen. And yes, that's what I refer to as sharpness. It's related to how well you've slept, and it's related to how well you've warmed up with the mouse, right? Those are the two main things. It's the adrenaline, and it's how much you've warmed up, right? So that's just a little coaching topic I'd like to bring up, because it actually makes a huge impact, especially if you're playing AFK lanes for a long time, for example, right? Just keeping that sharpness up is one of the main things that I tell people. It's like, oh, right, you're power farming, you're doing absolutely nothing, and then the gank shows up, and you're super slow, you didn't watch the minimap anymore, and it's like, you're essentially degrading yourself to a gold player. And the reason for that is very simple, right? It's because you're not sharp anymore, right? So maintaining sharpness, very big topic, especially if you're in prolonged situations of doing very little interactive stuff. So, I think we covered a lot of topics here. The rest of the game is a little bit downhill, more interactions, more stuff happening. There was just one topic that I want to talk about in terms of mid to late game objectives and how to play those out. But that's a very big, complicated topic, so I think I'm going to leave that to another review with more examples, because I just have one example here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the review and maybe learned something out of it. And I will see you guys some other time, hopefully. Hope we can do this again some other time.